What's up, everybody? It's Donnavan Smoot from BetSided, and I'm here to help you guys figure out the best ways to bet on the wNBA. When it comes to moneyline bets, which is simply who wins and who loses the game, there's a couple things to keep in mind. And the first thing is that the gap between the top teams and the bottom teams is fairly large, so you want to be a little bit safer when betting money lines. Favorites are winning over 64% of their games this year, and even though that there's been a few upsets, picking a really big underdog, which is normally going to have plus odds, is more of a dart throw than an actual pick. On top of looking at just favorites and who's favored, looking at who is the home team is a really big deal in this area as well, because home favorites are also winning over 64% of their games. Now let's look at spreads. Because the margins in the wNBA are so big, looking at the spread, especially for matches between great teams like the Las Vegas Aces and not so great teams like the Indiana Fever, that's the best way to find value on a night-to-night basis. The spread is basically picking how much you think a team is going to lose or win by. So let's go to a game on June 21st between the Las Vegas Aces and the Indiana Fever to understand better what we're dealing with. The Aces were 12.5-point favorites, making the Indiana Fever 12.5-point underdogs. And so if you took the Aces minus 12.5, that means that you would need the Aces to win by at least 13 points to win. But if you took the Fever as plus 12.5-point underdogs, that means that you'd win the bet as long as the Fever didn't lose by 13 points or more. Although home court advantage is good for money lines, it's not that great for predicting who's going to win on the spread. This season, home teams are just winning against the spread bets less than 50% of the time. Meanwhile, underdogs is the bet to make this season. They're cashing in at just over 55% of the time. And so that means that you don't have to blindly bet an underdog to win, but you don't have to be as scared or as conservative betting them against the spread. The last thing we're going to look at is point totals or over-unders. Point totals are fairly simple, and we're going to use the Aces Fever game from earlier to break these things down. So the total in that game was 165 points. Basically, if both teams' final score added up to be over 165 points, you would win the bet. If it was below, then it was a loss. And if both teams scored exactly 155 combined points, that's a push. And that's neither a win or a loss, and you end up getting your money back on that bet. There's a few stats that I like to look at when betting wNBA games, and the first is offensive and defensive rating. This is a really good way to look at teams' offense and defense in a controlled way because it shows you how many points they would score or give up in 100 possessions. It gives you a better sense of what their efficiency is like, leveling the playing field, because every team has a very different style of play. When I'm looking at totals, pace and defensive rating are my two favorite stats. Pace is how many possessions a team averages per 40 minutes, which is how long a game is without overtime. And if a team has a high pace, expect a lot of possessions and a lot of points. And if a team has a high defensive rating, then they give up a lot of points per 100 possessions. The biggest thing for me, though, is watching games. While the stats help me, I use them to justify what I see out on the floor. And trends are great in theory and on paper, but having firsthand knowledge of what you're betting is the best way to go. For more wNBA tips, picks, and analysis, check out BetSided for our daily wNBA best bets and tune in to our daily video content for even more. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe to the channel below.